Vă spun din nou bun găsit din Parlamentul European. Sunt Sabina Iosub, BEU începe chiar acum. Aș vrea să vorbim despre copii. Trebuie să ne gândim la cât de mulți sunt cei care sunt abandonați, fie în spitale, fie în centre de plasament, și cât de greu se poate face adopția în România sau poate chiar și în alte țări. Vedem exemplul României acum și apoi intrăm într-o dezbatere, într-o discuție extrem de importantă asupra acestui subiect.
Tinerii din centrele de plasament care au protestat luni în fața guvernului au fost primiți de ministrul muncii. I-au cerut premierului Dacian Cioloș o nouă lege a adopțiilor, care să le permită să ajungă mai repede în familiile care vor să-i adopte.
În momentul în care ei ajung în stradă, cei mai mulți alunecă. Foarte ușor alunecă spre grupuri care duc spre pierzanie. Cei mai slabi încearcă tentative de sinucid. Alții ajung să fure, să tâlhărească și sunt după gratii.
În a doua familie care am ajuns am găsit tot infernul, adică nu m-am mai înțeles, nu m-am acomodat, nu știam de ce sunt acolo și după aia am ajuns în cămin. Am luat decizia de la Protecția Copilului să dau cu semnătură că vreau să ajung în cămin. Am văzut și realitatea din cămin, că este crudă, cu violență, cu vorbe dure, cu prostituție.
Tinerii au venit și cu o petiție, dar și cu un proiect de lege despre care spun că le garantează toate drepturile copiilor instituționalizați.
Cer dreptul de a da drumul la legea adopției, pentru că sunt 1000 și mii de cazuri cu copii abandonați și suferă.
Și eu am avut dreptul la o familie, am avut șansa la o familie în Italia. Puteam fi în ziua de astăzi undeva într-o familie, fără niciun griji. S-au blocat adopțiile internaționale la scurt timp.
Today here with me are Mairead McGuinness from PPE Ireland. Thank you for being with me. And also Jana Hainsworth from Eurochild. Thank you for being with me. The first question will be, should any child be adopted? Can any child be adopted in the European Union?
Absolutely. The first principle as an organisation promoting the rights and well-being of children is that every child deserves to grow up in a family environment. And it's not always possible that that family environment is their biological family. And in that case, alternatives need to be found. So adoption is one of the scenarios that is possible in a holistic child protection system.
If any child should be adopted, should have the possibility to be adopted, why are the regulations, the rules so different in the European Union?
Every country has evolved very differently, and it's true that we have a very patchwork child protection system across all of the EU member states. And it's only now that we're beginning to understand the differences, the different definitions, the different standards through the mapping that the Fundamental Rights Agency did on child protection systems. But you're absolutely right, it's very, very diverse across the European Union.
What are the main problems in this area?
There are many issues that children are not getting the care that they deserve. That might be through lack of support to parents in the first place, so poor welfare systems, lack of intervention, lack of support, but also when children are at risk of abuse, neglect, that their interests are not put at the forefront and that there isn't systems that intervene in a timely and an effective way.
Is it let's say, a common rule for the European states in the case of adoption, actually?
Look, I think we all know that there are 28 member states with very different rules around adoption. And I think it's one of the areas, certainly in my member state, Ireland, where we're having very deep reflection and discussion because of the past and the history of adoption in Ireland. And sad to say, there are many people today, adults older than I am, or indeed of my age, who were adopted and who are now seeking to reconnect with their families. And we're having to acknowledge that many of them were hurt during the process, and that at one time it was unacceptable for a woman to have a child outside of marriage, and those children were literally forced into adoptions. We indeed saw the situation where many of those children were adopted in the United States. And what I think our experience should tell us, and perhaps the experience of other member states, is that what happens in your past as a child has implications for you as an adult. So adoption is certainly still something that happens because it can be the right choice for the child and the interests of the child. And I think that's where we both, I hope, agree fundamentally on. And when we talk about adoption, it is not always about taking the child completely away from its birth family. It sometimes is, but not always. For example, there can be relatives or family members who also wish to be part of the child's family and want to look after that child. And that has to be part of the solution. And indeed, grandparents have a role as well. So there are very different rules around adoption. It still happens, I think, to a lesser extent in some member states now than in the past. And I think to some extent, for example, in Romania, when people saw, you know, some of the orphanages and some of the terrible scenes, there was an automatic desire to help and do something. And one of the responses was to adopt children, and it has worked out in many cases, not in all cases. So it is a very complex and fraught issue. And I think those of us who were born and are reared in a birth family perhaps don't understand some of those consequences. Indeed, I know people who have been adopted, and I know families who have adopted children, inter-country adoptions. And it is a difficult thing to do. We have children naturally, and we're not asked about whether we're fit to rear them or not. Adoptive families have got to go through, rightly, a screening process for that. But again, we probably don't really fully understand whether that system is the same. I dare say it's not across the 28 member states. And increasingly in this House, in the Petitions Committee and in my office, we get quite a lot of correspondence around this issue of children, adoption, the social care systems. From all around Europe. From all around the European Union.
There are some main criteria that should be, let's say, put on every family from Europe. Doesn't matter that we are talking about Ireland, United Kingdom, Romania, or any other country.
Difficult
That's
one.
a difficult question. There are no common criteria, and I think, as Mairead has explained, it's a complex, long-term learning process, and each country has taken its own journey and is developing standards. I think that the European Union has an important role to facilitate and enable that learning, and increasingly we are seeing more and more trans-border cases. So I think that the European Union does have a very, very important role, but it's not an area where you can have a top-down approach. I think that we can really learn from the standards and the way that different member states are developing their policies and practices in this very, very important area. And Ireland is certainly one example where, because they have had such a dramatic and very painful history in this area, that there's a lot of lessons that are being learnt around child protection systems, including the adoption as a last resort. And I think Mairead is right that it's not always the right solution, that we know more and more that even though children might flourish in childhood, if they don't understand their roots, when they enter adulthood or go through their adult lives, challenges are much more difficult to face when you don't have a knowledge and an understanding of your origins.
If I may, one of the most interesting things that has happened in Ireland is that some of our elected members of Parliament have spoken about their adoption, the impact it has had on them and their search for identity. And that's been hugely important in opening the public debate. And I mean, our Deputy Prime Minister at the moment has been wonderful to speak about her experience and how she has journeyed and to talk about the rights of people who are adopted. In addition to that, I think for inter-country adoptions, where clearly there are cultural differences, I know that there are principles in the Irish adoption strategy which require that the families take into account these issues and at all times have in place a system that the child is kept informed about their background, origin, culture, and that it is not just that a child is taken, is adopted, and there is a cut-off from its origins. And I think that's very important as well. Now, it's a very difficult challenge for adoptive families and for adoptive communities, but I think it is the direction we have to move in because of the experience where we have seen adoptions to be very difficult for adults in later life. I think a more open approach is definitely required for the child and for when they become adults as well. And indeed, we need to help families who are adopting children. And I know in Ireland at the moment there are about 1,000 families who really want to adopt a child, and there are no children or very few children children in Ireland available for adoption, and they are looking elsewhere.
How long should this process be, the process of adoption? Because we've seen the example in Romania that families are trying for years to adopt a child.
I don't think you can say how long. I mean, what is right for the child is stability and security. But at the same time, an adoption process is so complex, and it is very long. It's a long-term decision. You're essentially severing the ties with their biological family and removing parental rights to another family. So, of course, it needs to take the time it needs to take. At the same time, as a children's rights organization, we know that childhood passes so quickly, and 3 months, 6 months in a child's life is enormously impactful on their overall development and their sense of security. So, of course, the minimum, but acknowledging all the complexities of making difficult decisions of that kind.
Yeah, and I
Thank you, and I will continue the discussion with Ms. McGuinness.
Yeah, can I just pick up on that point? Because I think one of the most important issues is that the child, regardless of whether it is adopted or in care, needs to be considered very carefully, so that if a child is waiting, for example, for an adoptive family to be approved, that the care it receives must be the very best that it can receive, so that its development is continued rather than hampered if it has come from a difficult family situation. Where a small baby is involved, we know that it is really important that they bond with an adult, and therefore that's a really serious concern. On the other hand, I don't think we can say, well, we'll give it 3 weeks and assess if a family is suitable or not. We might make the wrong choices, we might make the correct choices.
Yeah, that's
and
correct.
very often in the public debate, even back in Ireland, families who are trying to adopt a child are very angry when the system is taking so long, because they want dearly to have a child, and there is always that struggle between the social care, social services system and the demands of families to have a child adopted. And I think on balance what I would hope happens is that there is somebody looking after the child's interests in all of this, whether it's a child of Irish origin or a child that comes from another EU member state or from outside
Who
the
should be the
European
one?
Union. Look, there has to be an effective system of social care in the member states. So there have to be trained social workers that engage with the family, that do all the assessments. And we have that in Ireland. But even in Ireland, where we have a good system in place, families would be upset by the length of time it takes. Indeed, sometimes it's quite an intrusive process, whether somebody comes into your home, checks you, checks your family, checks everything about you. But it is probably absolutely essential that it is an intrusive process, because we are dealing with the life of a child, and a child who has been severed, if you like, from their birth family for whatever reason. So I think this is always going to be very fraught with difficulties, and I do think it's fair to say that we are learning all of the time, and I hope we're learning the right lessons, and that we're keeping the child's interests at heart, mindful of how this might impact on them right up to their senior years and beyond, and indeed how it might impact on children that they will have. And we are learning lessons about how adoption impacts on this. But we also know, and for example in Haiti at the moment, I think there are 30,000 children who are in orphanages because of the problems that they had there. And it's not to say that all of those children are available for adoption or can be adopted. You would like to think they could be adopted at home, because I think that's the best approach. But where it's not realistic, for example, we need to look at these options, but only where, for example, the Hague Convention has been ratified by the parties involved and where all the legal processes are put in place. There is always the risk of child trafficking. There's always the risk and concern that money could change hands. Although for genuine people who want to have a child into their homes and to adopt a child, this isn't an issue. On the other hand, I think we have to safeguard that it doesn't become an issue.
We had this problem in Romania, as you know, after the communism period. And for a long period of time in Romania, the international adoption was actually blocked due to these kind of problems. What do you think should be the main thing to be looked at when talking about international adoptions, and when talking exactly about this problem that might appear, the problem of trafficking.
Well, first of all, I've been to Romania, and indeed it's some years ago, and I did see beautiful babies that were, you know, abandoned actually, and many would probably be placed in care or for adoption. So I've seen that problem at first hand. I think we have to make sure that countries who engage in this process, inter-country adoption, that there are legal systems in place, that there's a recognition that a country and its citizens are looking to adopt from another country, and that there are safeguards in place. I think it is not acceptable that we would allow people just to travel somewhere, adopt a child without consulting the courts and the social care system, and bring a child back to their own country. And really that cannot happen and should not happen. And where it does, we really would have huge concerns about it. So I think it is about having the legal systems in place, the checks and balances, the involvement of the social workers, their active engagement with it. And I suppose we have to both acknowledge the pressure that comes from adoptive families, but also resist that pressure so that we don't break our own rules. And indeed in Ireland there are countries where in the past we did have relationships in terms of inter-country adoptions where we don't have now because we haven't been happy with how the process was taking place, and indeed some of my own constituents are unhappy about that. But on the other hand, I would always say that look, you need legal safeguards, you need to do things correctly in the lifelong interests of the child that we're talking about, and indeed in the interests of those who are adoptive parents, so that nothing would happen to then, for example, separate an adopted child from its adoptive family if the law was found to have been wanting. So very delicate balance. And that's why it is quite interesting that in this House, in this Parliament, we are now hearing more about child-related issues, whether they are about cross-border family breakdown, about the issue of differences in adoption procedures. In some member states, adoption happens rather quickly, and others not so. And we're trying to get, at this stage, a bird's-eye view of what's happening, so that while we cannot interfere in the systems in place in our 28 member states, I think we do need to have a view of that in the Parliament with, I suppose, the objective of trying to guide either progress in this area or at least guide the debate which we're having now, because I think we need a public debate. We definitely need that to take place.
Let's continue our discussion after seeing some examples from Romania.
La începutul acestei luni, președintele Klaus Iohannis a promulgat legea privind simplificarea procedurii adopției. Noua formă a legii prevede condiții mai ușoare pentru părinții adoptivi care sunt cetățeni români. Au fost simplificate procedurile privind cererile de încredințare, dar și cele privind obținerea atestatelor pentru adopție. Și în cadrul proceselor se reduc termenele de judecată. Primul termen de judecată nu poate depăși 15 zile de la data înregistrării cererii. În loc de 30 de zile cât este acum, termenul de apel a fost redus la 5 zile. Se introduce astfel concediul de acomodare de 1 an, pentru care pot opta cei care adoptă copii mai mari de 2 ani. Ei pot beneficia și de o indemnizație lunară de circa 1700 de lei, acordată pe parcursul celor 12 luni de concediu. În ceea ce privește adopția internațională, termenul în care un copil este eligibil pentru o adopție peste hotare s-a redus de la 2 ani la 1 an. Chiar și cu noile modificări, procedurile de adopție sunt greoaie în România, iar birocrația face ca un copil să poată fi adoptat după ani de zile.
And we're back discussing about the adoption in the European Union, and I think that a very important thing is communication. Communicating between the member states in order to see exactly what the child needs.
Yeah, well, communication is vital at every single level, and I suppose where it really is important is communication between the child that is adopted and its new family, and communication about its birth, its origin, its culture. So I think that level of communication is really vital. And yes, the links and communications between the countries, and also whether there is an acceptance by countries, whether they are member states or otherwise, that children will be adopted from their member state. I'm just asking myself out loud, for example, do I know of cases where Irish children recently have been adopted elsewhere, in other words, from Ireland, and I don't think there are cases, and I'm not sure how we in Ireland would react to that. And yet, on the other hand, we see Irish people wanting to adopt elsewhere. So I think we sometimes have to question our own mindsets around this issue. And I think sometimes the desire to adopt comes from, seeing something that is awful and wanting to help wanting to help those children that are in dire need. And very often there's a difficulty for people to understand why we have such a lengthy process and why there is such rigour involved. And I suppose no more than we're having this chat now, it is important that people understand why procedures are important, even though they may be complex and difficult, because the risk of things going wrong and the risk of the trafficking issue that we've talked about earlier are very real in a mobile world, and a child can very easily be snatched and misplaced, and that therefore we have to be sensitive to these issues. So yes, I think more engagement between courts, for example, and we have that with the network, between competent authorities is also very important, and this Parliament too. Just hearing my colleagues talk about this in the Petitions Committee, that's also very important, because it's where we begin to understand each other better and therefore perhaps come up with solutions, or at least, as I say, focus the debate.
Is a child who has been adopted different from emotional point of view?
I think that's too stark a question, because it would suggest that we can see an adopted child and it's different. I mean, we have to be sensitive. A child in a loving adopted family is their child, and adoptive parents love the child as their own. Sometimes in later life that child will seek its birth parents, and indeed sometimes find their birth parents. It doesn't diminish the role of the adopted family, but it does, if you like, satisfy a need in the child that is adopted. I think to say they're different is wrong, frankly, because they're children and they grow into adults. I think the difference can be made more stark if we don't deal with the realities of adoption and don't deal with the need around communication and engagement and telling and talking to a child about their origins and their background in a way which makes them comfortable from an early stage. Now, I say this with great ease, but I imagine if I were to do this, I would find it extremely difficult, because it is such a contentious issue, and how do you say things? And that's why, right through the adoptive process, adoptive parents deserve support. And they need support. And in many member states, they get that support. And I dare say in other member states, they don't get sufficient support.
We all have to understand how difficult this process is. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
Today, vouă celor de acasă vă spun să rămâneți pe Antena 3 și să vă gândiți la felul în care putem, de fapt, să ajutăm în a modifica acest sistem al adopției în România. Sunt atât de multe de discutat și atât de multe de făcut.